As you settle into this moment, feel the surface beneath you supporting your weight. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the quiet beating of your heart, the subtle warmth of your skin. These sensations, so familiar that they often pass unnoticed, are evidence of something extraordinary. They are the work of systems that have been functioning without pause since before you were born. Systems that coordinate millions of processes every second, maintaining the delicate balance we call life. Tonight, we explore human physiology, not as a collection of facts to memorize, but as a journey through the living landscape of the body. We will walk gently through this terrain, discovering how cells communicate, how organs collaborate, how energy flows like water through channels carved over millions of years of evolution. We will see how the body is both a city of countless inhabitants working in harmony and a symphony where each instrument contributes to a song that never ends. Physiology is the study of function, where anatomy asks, what is it and where is it? Physiology asks, how does it work and why does it work this way? It is the science of mechanisms, of processes, of the continuous adjustments that allow life to persist in a changing world. Every breath you take involves the coordinated action of muscles, nerves, blood vessels, and cells too numerous to count. Every thought that crosses your mind requires the precise movement of ions across membranes, the release of chemical messengers, the interpretation of electrical signals. Physiology is the story of how all these events unfold, how they connect, how they create the experience of being alive. The human body contains approximately 37 trillion cells. Each one is a universe unto itself, yet none exists in isolation. These cells organize themselves into tissues, tissues into organs, organs into systems, and these systems do not operate independently. They are woven together by communication networks more complex than any human invention, coordinating their activities through chemical signals, electrical impulses, and mechanical forces. The result is an integrated whole, a living being capable of responding to its environment, maintaining its internal stability, and perpetuating itself across generations. Think of the body as a vast city. In this city, cells are the citizens, each with a specific role to play. Some cells are like power plant workers, generating the energy that fuels all activities. Others are messengers, carrying information from one district to another. Some are builders, constructing and repairing the infrastructure. Others are defenders, patrolling for threats and mounting responses when danger appears. The city has systems for transportation, bringing nutrients to every neighborhood and removing waste. It has systems for communication, ensuring that distant regions receive the signals they need. It has regulatory mechanisms that maintain optimal conditions, adjusting to changes in the external environment while preserving stability within. This metaphor of the city will accompany us through our journey. But we will also think of the body as a symphony, where each system is an instrument section, contributing its unique voice to a harmonious whole. The cardiovascular system is like the string section, providing the continuous, rhythmic foundation. The respiratory system resembles the woodwinds, bringing in fresh oxygen like breath across reeds. The nervous system is the conductor, coordinating all activities with precise timing. And like a symphony, the body's performance is not rigid but responsive, capable of shifting tempo and volume to match the demands of the moment. As we begin this exploration, understand that we are not learning something separate from ourselves. We are learning about the very processes occurring within you right now. As you breathe, your diaphragm contracts, creating negative pressure that draws air into your lungs. As this air reaches tiny air sacs called alveoli, oxygen crosses into your bloodstream through membranes just 1 cell thick. This oxygen binds to hemoglobin molecules in red blood cells, which are carried by the current of your circulation to every tissue in your body. There, the oxygen is released, enabling cells to generate the energy they need to perform their functions. And all of this happens automatically, coordinated by mechanisms so refined that they operate far below the level of conscious awareness. Let us begin gently with the most fundamental principle of physiology: homeostasis. Homeostasis is the body's ability to maintain stable internal conditions despite changes in the external environment. The word comes from Greek roots meaning similar standing, reflecting the idea that certain variables remain relatively constant. Your body temperature, for instance, stays close to 37 degrees Celsius, whether you are in a hot desert or a cold winter landscape. Your blood sugar levels remain within a narrow range, whether you have just eaten or have fasted for hours. Your blood pH, a measure of acidity, varies only slightly, hovering around 7.4, even though the metabolic processes occurring in your cells constantly produce acids and bases. This constancy is not the result of rigid structures, but of dynamic processes. Homeostasis is not a static equilibrium, but a dynamic equilibrium, maintained through continuous adjustments. Think of a tightrope walker who remains balanced not by standing perfectly still, but by making constant, subtle corrections in response to every shift and sway. The body does the same, monitoring conditions, detecting deviations, and implementing responses to bring variables back toward their set points. These responses are orchestrated through feedback loops, the fundamental mechanism by which the body regulates itself. A feedback loop involves several components: a sensor that detects the value of a variable, a control center that compares this value to the desired set point, and effectors that carry out responses to correct any deviations. Most feedback loops in the body are negative feedback loops, meaning that the response opposes the direction of change. If your body temperature rises, mechanisms activate to cool you down. If your blood sugar drops, mechanisms engage to raise it back up. This negative feedback creates stability, preventing variables from swinging too far in either direction. Occasionally, the body employs positive feedback loops, where the response amplifies the initial change rather than opposing it. These are less common, but serve important functions in specific contexts. During childbirth, for example, the pressure of the baby's head against the cervix triggers the release of a hormone called oxytocin, which causes uterine contractions. These contractions increase the pressure on the cervix, which triggers more oxytocin release, which causes stronger contractions, and so on, in an escalating cycle that culminates in delivery. Positive feedback loops are powerful but inherently self-limiting. They drive processes toward a conclusion rather than maintaining stability. The concept of homeostasis extends beyond individual variables to encompass the coordination of multiple systems. Consider what happens when you exercise. Your muscles demand more oxygen and glucose to fuel their increased activity. In response, your heart rate accelerates, pumping blood more rapidly through your circulation. Your breathing deepens and quickens, bringing more oxygen into your lungs and expelling more carbon dioxide. blood vessels in your muscles dilate, allowing greater flow to the tissues that need it most, while vessels in your digestive system constrict, redirecting blood away from areas where it is less urgently needed. Your pancreas adjusts its hormone secretion to mobilize glucose from storage sites. Your sweat glands activate to dissipate the heat generated by muscle contraction. All of these changes occur in concert, coordinated by nervous and hormonal signals, maintaining homeostasis even as the body's demands shift dramatically. Understanding homeostasis requires understanding the internal environment that the body works to preserve. This internal environment is primarily the fluid that surrounds our cells, known as extracellular fluid. Every cell in your body is bathed in this fluid, which serves as the medium through which nutrients, gases, wastes, and signaling molecules are exchanged. The composition of extracellular fluid determines what resources are available to cells and influences how cells function. If this fluid becomes too acidic, proteins lose their shape and stop working properly. If its salt concentration changes too much, cells may swell or shrink, disrupting their internal machinery. The body's regulatory systems work constantly to keep the extracellular fluid within the narrow ranges that support cellular life. The extracellular fluid is not uniform throughout the body. It exists in different compartments. About a third of extracellular fluid is plasma, the liquid portion of blood that flows through vessels. The remaining 2/3 is interstitial fluid, which fills the spaces between cells and tissues. These two compartments are in continuous exchange, with fluid moving back and forth across the thin walls of the smallest blood vessels, called capillaries. This exchange allows nutrients from the blood to reach cells and allows waste products from cells to enter the blood for removal. The balance between fluid in the plasma and fluid in the tissues is itself regulated, preventing excessive accumulation that could lead to swelling. Inside cells exists another fluid compartment, the intracellular fluid, which contains the cytoplasm and organelles where most cellular processes occur. The intracellular fluid has a very different composition from the extracellular fluid. It contains higher concentrations of potassium and lower concentrations of sodium, whereas the extracellular fluid is the opposite. This difference in ion concentrations is not accidental. It is actively maintained by cellular pumps that use energy to move ions against their concentration gradients. These concentration differences are essential for many cellular functions, including the generation of electrical signals in nerve and muscle cells. The boundary between the intracellular and extracellular fluid is the cell membrane, a thin barrier made primarily of lipids arranged in a double layer. This membrane is not a solid wall, but a fluid mosaic with proteins embedded in the lipid bilayer, like boats floating in a sea. Some of these proteins form channels that allow specific substances to cross the membrane. Others are pumps that actively transport molecules from one side to the other. Still others are receptors that detect signaling molecules and trigger responses inside the cell. The cell membrane is selective, permitting some substances to pass freely while blocking or regulating others. This selectivity is crucial for maintaining the distinct environments inside and outside the cell. Substances cross cell membranes through several mechanisms. Small, non-polar molecules like oxygen and carbon dioxide can dissolve in the lipid bilayer and pass directly through. Water can also cross membranes, though it does so through specialized protein channels called aquaporins. Larger or charged molecules cannot pass through the lipid layer on their own. They require assistance. Some cross through protein channels, moving down their concentration gradients in a process called facilitated diffusion. Others are moved against their concentration gradients by protein pumps in a process called active transport that requires energy. Still others enter or leave cells through vesicles, membrane-bound sacs that fuse with the cell membrane, releasing their contents outside the cell or bringing material inside. These transport mechanisms allow cells to control their internal environment, taking in what they need and expelling what they do not. They also enable cells to respond to signals from their surroundings. When a signaling molecule binds to a receptor on the cell surface, it can trigger a cascade of events inside the cell, altering gene expression, enzyme activity, or other cellular functions. This communication between cells is essential for coordinating the activities of different tissues and organs, allowing the body to function as an integrated whole. Communication in the body occurs through several systems, each with its own characteristics. The nervous system communicates through electrical signals and neurotransmitters, operating with great speed and precision. A nerve impulse can travel from your brain to your muscles in a fraction of a second, allowing rapid responses to changes in the environment. The endocrine system communicates through hormones, chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to reach distant target cells. Hormonal communication is slower than neural communication, but often more prolonged, producing effects that last minutes, hours, or even longer. Some cells communicate through paracrine signals, releasing chemicals that affect nearby cells rather than distant ones. Others use autocrine signals, secreting molecules that bind to receptors on their own surface, influencing their own behavior. The integration of these communication systems allows for both rapid and sustained responses. When you encounter a sudden threat, your nervous system triggers an immediate reaction. Your heart races, your pupils dilate, your muscles tense, ready for action. At the same time, your adrenal glands release hormones like epinephrine and cortisol into your bloodstream, sustaining the alert state and mobilizing energy reserves. Once the threat passes, other neural and hormonal signals initiate the recovery process, returning your body to its resting state. This interplay between different communication systems enables the body to respond appropriately to a wide range of challenges. The concept of levels of organization is central to understanding physiology. At the most fundamental level are atoms, the basic units of matter. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur are the most abundant atoms in living things, along with smaller amounts of others like calcium, potassium, sodium, and iron. These atoms combine to form molecules, from simple ones like water and oxygen, to complex ones like proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, and nucleic acids. Molecules assemble into organelles, specialized structures within cells that perform specific functions. The mitochondria, for instance, are organelles where most of the cell's energy is generated. The endoplasmic reticulum is a network of membranes where proteins and lipids are synthesized. The nucleus houses the cell's genetic material, directing the production of proteins that determine cellular structure and function. Cells are the next level of organization. The human body contains many different types of cells, each specialized for particular roles. Muscle cells are long and filled with contractile proteins that generate force. Nerve cells have long extensions that carry electrical signals over distances. Epithelial cells form sheets that line surfaces and cavities, providing barriers and controlling what passes through. Red blood cells are packed with hemoglobin and lack a nucleus, maximizing their capacity to carry oxygen. Each cell type has a structure suited to its function, a principle that recurs throughout biology. Form follows function. Groups of similar cells working together constitute tissues. The body contains 4 primary tissue types. Epithelial tissue covers body surfaces, lines hollow organs, and forms glands. It serves protective, secretory, and absorptive functions. Connective tissue provides structural support and connects different body parts. It includes diverse forms like bone, cartilage, tendons, ligaments, blood, and adipose tissue. Muscle tissue is specialized for contraction, generating the forces that produce movement. It comes in 3 varieties: skeletal muscle, which attaches to bones and produces voluntary movements; cardiac muscle, found only in the heart, which contracts rhythmically throughout life; and smooth muscle, which lines blood vessels and hollow organs, controlling their diameter and the movement of contents through them. Nervous tissue is specialized for communication, generating and transmitting electrical signals. It consists of neurons, which are the signaling cells, and glial cells, which support and protect neurons. Tissues combine to form organs, structures composed of 2 or more tissue types working together to perform specific functions. The heart, for example, contains cardiac muscle tissue that generates the force of contraction, connective tissue that forms the heart's structure and valves, epithelial tissue that lines the heart's chambers and vessels, and nervous tissue that regulates the heartbeat. Each organ has a characteristic architecture that enables its function. The structure of the lung, with its branching airways ending in millions of tiny air sacs surrounded by capillaries, creates an enormous surface area for gas exchange. The structure of the kidney, with its intricate network of tubules and blood vessels, allows it to filter blood and produce urine. Organs are organized into organ systems, groups of organs that work together to accomplish broader physiological functions. The cardiovascular system, consisting of the heart and blood vessels, transports materials throughout the body. The respiratory system, including the lungs and airways, exchanges gases with the environment. The digestive system, from the mouth to the intestines and associated organs, breaks down food and absorbs nutrients. The urinary system filters blood and eliminates wastes while regulating fluid and electrolyte balance. The nervous system detects stimuli and coordinates responses. The endocrine system regulates body functions through hormone secretion. The muscular and skeletal systems produce movement and provide support. The integumentary system, comprising skin and associated structures, protects the body and helps regulate temperature. The immune system defends against pathogens and foreign substances. The reproductive system enables the creation of new individuals. These systems are not isolated modules, but interconnected networks. The cardiovascular system depends on the respiratory system to oxygenate blood and remove carbon dioxide. The digestive system relies on the cardiovascular system to transport absorbed nutrients to cells. The nervous and endocrine systems work together to regulate nearly every physiological process. The skeletal system provides minerals that the blood must maintain at appropriate concentrations, and the urinary system plays a critical role in this regulation. The immune system uses the circulatory and lymphatic systems as highways for transporting defensive cells. Understanding physiology means understanding not only how each system works, but how they integrate to support the life of the organism as a whole. Energy is the currency that powers all physiological processes. Every muscle contraction, every nerve impulse, every synthesis of a new molecule requires energy. Cells obtain this energy by breaking down nutrients, particularly glucose, through a process called cellular respiration. Glucose is oxidized in a series of chemical reactions that release energy in a controlled manner. This energy is captured in the bonds of a molecule called adenosine triphosphate, or ATP. ATP serves as the immediate energy source for most cellular work. When a cell needs energy, it breaks a bond in ATP, releasing the energy for use and leaving behind adenosine diphosphate, or ADP. The ADP can then be recharged back into ATP using energy from glucose oxidation. This cycle of ATP breakdown and regeneration occurs continuously, with each cell in your body producing and using millions of ATP molecules every second. The generation of ATP occurs primarily in the mitochondria, organelles often called the powerhouses of the cell. Mitochondria have a distinctive structure with two membranes, an outer membrane that encloses the organelle, and an inner membrane that folds into cristae, creating a large surface area. The space inside the inner membrane is called the matrix, and it is here that many of the chemical reactions of cellular respiration take place. The process begins in the cytoplasm, where glucose is broken down into smaller molecules in a pathway called glycolysis. These molecules enter the mitochondria, where they are further processed in a cycle of reactions known as the citric acid cycle, or Krebs cycle. Throughout these reactions, electrons are extracted from glucose and its breakdown products. These electrons are then passed along a chain of protein complexes in the inner mitochondrial membrane called the electron transport chain. As electrons move through this chain, energy is released and used to pump protons across the membrane, creating a gradient. The flow of protons back across the membrane drives the synthesis of ATP, much like water flowing through a dam can generate electricity. This elegant system extracts far more energy from glucose than would be possible in a single step. By breaking down glucose gradually through multiple reactions, the cell captures energy in small increments, storing it in ATP molecules rather than releasing it all at once as heat. Oxygen plays a crucial role as the final acceptor of electrons at the end of the electron transport chain. When oxygen accepts electrons, it combines with protons to form water. This is why we need oxygen to live. Without it, the electron transport chain cannot function, ATP production plummets, and cells cannot perform the work necessary to sustain life. Not all cells rely equally on oxygen. Some cells, like those in skeletal muscle during intense exercise, can generate ATP through anaerobic pathways that do not require oxygen. These pathways are less efficient, producing far fewer ATP molecules per glucose molecule, but they can operate when oxygen delivery cannot keep pace with energy demands. The trade-off is the production of lactate, a byproduct that accumulates and contributes to muscle fatigue. Once exercise ends and oxygen becomes abundant again, the lactate can be converted back into glucose in the liver, completing a cycle that helps maintain energy availability during and after exertion. Energy in the body flows in patterns that mirror the flow of nutrients and information. Food is broken down in the digestive system, releasing nutrients that enter the bloodstream. These nutrients are distributed to cells throughout the body, where they are used to generate ATP or to build cellular structures. The ATP powers processes ranging from muscle contraction to the synthesis of new proteins to the maintenance of ion gradients across membranes. Waste products from these processes enter the blood and are transported to organs that eliminate them. Carbon dioxide to the lungs, urea and other wastes to the kidneys. This continuous flow of energy and materials sustains the living state. The body also stores energy for times when food is not immediately available. After a meal, when nutrient levels in the blood are high, excess glucose is stored as glycogen in the liver and muscles. Glycogen is a large, branched molecule composed of many glucose units linked together, providing a readily accessible energy reserve. When blood glucose levels drop between meals, hormones signal the liver to break down glycogen, releasing glucose back into the bloodstream. The body can store only a limited amount of glycogen, however. Additional energy is stored as fat in adipose tissue. Fat storage is far more efficient than glycogen storage. A gram of fat contains more than twice the energy of a gram of carbohydrate, and fat reserves in adipose tissue are essentially unlimited, growing or shrinking based on the balance between energy intake and expenditure. The regulation of energy balance involves complex interactions between the nervous and endocrine systems. Hormones like insulin and glucagon adjust the storage and release of glucose. Insulin, secreted by the pancreas when blood glucose is high, promotes the uptake of glucose into cells and its storage as glycogen or fat. Glucagon, secreted when blood glucose is low, stimulates the breakdown of glycogen and the release of glucose from the liver. Other hormones, like leptin and ghrelin, regulate appetite and energy expenditure, creating feedback loops that attempt to match caloric intake to the body's needs. These mechanisms are not perfect. They evolved in environments where food scarcity was a greater threat than abundance, but they demonstrate the body's capacity for self-regulation. Temperature regulation is another vital aspect of homeostasis. The chemical reactions that sustain life are temperature dependent, proceeding efficiently only within a narrow range. The human body maintains a core temperature around 37 degrees Celsius through a balance between heat production and heat loss. Metabolic processes, especially those occurring in the liver and muscles, continuously generate heat as a byproduct of energy transformations. This heat must be dissipated to the environment to prevent overheating. When the body is too warm, several mechanisms activate to promote heat loss. Blood vessels in the skin dilate, bringing more warm blood to the surface where heat can radiate into the air. Sweat glands secrete fluid onto the skin surface, and the evaporation of this sweat carries heat away. Behavioral responses also come into play, seeking shade, removing clothing, reducing activity. When the body is too cold, opposite mechanisms engage. Blood vessels in the skin constrict, reducing heat loss to the environment. Muscles may contract rhythmically in shivers, generating heat through increased metabolic activity. Hormones are released that boost metabolic rate, increasing heat production. Behavioral responses include adding clothing, seeking warmth, and increasing physical activity. The control center for temperature regulation is located in a part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus contains neurons that act as thermoreceptors, detecting changes in blood temperature as it flows through the brain. It also receives input from thermoreceptors in the skin, which detect environmental temperature. By integrating information about both core and skin temperature, the hypothalamus orchestrates appropriate responses. If core temperature deviates from the set point, The hypothalamus activates neural and hormonal pathways that engage the effectors, blood vessels, sweat glands, muscles, to correct the deviation. This is another example of negative feedback. The response opposes the direction of change, maintaining stability. The hypothalamus serves as a control center for many homeostatic processes, not just temperature regulation. It regulates thirst and water balance, hunger and energy balance, sleep-wake cycles, and responses to stress. It links the nervous and endocrine systems, producing hormones that control the pituitary gland, which in turn regulates other endocrine glands throughout the body. The hypothalamus exemplifies the principle of integration. It receives diverse inputs, processes them, and coordinates outputs across multiple systems to maintain homeostasis. As we continue our gentle exploration, it becomes clear that physiology is fundamentally about integration. Individual molecules, cells, tissues, organs, and systems do not function in isolation. They are connected by flows of information, energy, and materials. The beating of the heart affects the activity of every cell in the body by delivering oxygen and nutrients. The contraction of muscles influences the cardiovascular system by increasing demand for blood flow. The digestion of food affects blood glucose levels, which in turn influence hormone secretion, which alters metabolism in tissues throughout the body. Understanding any one part of physiology requires understanding how it fits into the whole. This integration is not rigid but adaptive. The body continuously monitors its internal and external environments, adjusting its activities to match changing conditions. When you stand up after lying down, blood tends to pool in your legs due to gravity, reducing the amount returning to your heart and potentially causing a drop in blood pressure. Within moments, receptors detect this change, and reflexes activate that increase heart rate and constrict blood vessels, maintaining adequate blood flow to the brain. When you eat, the presence of food in your stomach triggers neural and hormonal signals that increase digestive secretions, alter gut motility, and prepare your body to absorb and process nutrients. When you exercise, coordinated changes occur across multiple systems to support the increased activity of your muscles. And when you rest, different adjustments promote recovery, growth, and repair. The capacity for adaptation extends over different timescales. Some adaptations occur in seconds, like the adjustments to blood pressure when you stand. Others unfold over minutes or hours, like the hormonal changes that regulate energy availability throughout the day. Still others develop over days, weeks, or months, like the increase in muscle mass that results from repeated exercise or the acclimatization to high altitude that occurs with prolonged exposure. These longer-term adaptations often involve changes in gene expression, with cells producing more or different proteins to meet sustained demands. Yet even these slower adaptations rely on the same fundamental mechanisms: feedback loops, communication pathways, and the integration of information from multiple sources. The study of physiology also reveals the body's remarkable redundancy and resilience. Many critical functions have backup mechanisms. If one pathway for maintaining blood pressure fails, others can compensate. If one kidney is lost, the remaining kidney can increase its function to handle the full workload. If part of the liver is damaged, the remaining tissue can regenerate. This redundancy provides a margin of safety, allowing the body to maintain homeostasis even when challenged by injury or disease. It also means that physiological dysfunction often becomes apparent only when multiple mechanisms fail or when compensatory mechanisms are overwhelmed. Yet the body's capacity for compensation has limits. Prolonged stress, chronic disease, aging, and severe injury can exceed the body's homeostatic capabilities. When compensation fails, variables begin to deviate from their normal ranges, and physiological function becomes impaired. Understanding these limits and the factors that influence them is as important as understanding normal physiology. It informs medical practice, guiding the diagnosis and treatment of disease. It also highlights the importance of maintaining health through nutrition, physical activity, adequate rest, and avoidance of harmful exposures to preserve the body's homeostatic capacity. Throughout this exploration, we return again and again to the theme of balance. Physiology is the science of balance between opposing forces, between different systems, between stability and change. The body exists in a state of dynamic equilibrium, never truly at rest, but constantly adjusting, responding, adapting. This balance is not something imposed from outside, but emerges from the coordinated actions of countless parts, each following relatively simple rules, yet together producing the complex, integrated behavior of the living organism. As we move forward, we will delve deeper into specific systems, exploring how each one works and how it contributes to the whole. We will see the cardiovascular system as the river system of the body, with the heart as its central pump, the blood vessels as its channels, and the blood as the current that carries materials to every cell. We will examine the respiratory system as the interface between the body and the atmosphere, where gases are exchanged across membranes so thin they are nearly invisible, yet so vital that without them, life would cease within minutes. We will trace the journey of food through the digestive system, observing how complex nutrients are broken down into simple molecules that cells can use. We will explore the urinary system's role in filtering blood, balancing fluids and electrolytes, and eliminating wastes. We will follow electrical signals through the nervous system, marveling at the speed and precision with which information is transmitted. We will watch hormones travel through the bloodstream, binding to receptors and altering cellular behavior in distant tissues. We will see how muscles convert chemical energy into mechanical force, how bones provide structure and protection while serving as dynamic reservoirs of minerals, how skin forms a barrier against the environment while regulating temperature and providing sensation. In each case, we will discover not just mechanisms, but principles. We will see how structure relates to function, how feedback loops create stability, how communication enables coordination, how energy flows sustain life. We will find the same patterns recurring in different systems, gradients that drive transport, receptors that detect signals, cascades that amplify responses, cycles that renew resources. These patterns are not accidental. They reflect the solutions that evolution has found to the challenges of maintaining life. Solutions refined over billions of years, tested by countless generations, preserved because they work. The human body is an inheritance, carrying within it the history of life on Earth. The mechanisms we will explore are not unique to humans, but are variations on themes found throughout the animal kingdom and beyond. The process by which your cells generate ATP is essentially the same as that used by every other animal, and remarkably similar to processes in plants and bacteria. The way your nerve cells transmit signals is shared by all animals with nervous systems. The hormones that regulate your physiology have counterparts in other species, sometimes nearly identical in structure and function. This deep similarity reflects our common ancestry, the fact that all living things descend from ancient predecessors who discovered these fundamental solutions to life's problems. Yet, within this shared framework exists variation and specialization. The human cardiovascular system shares basic features with that of other mammals, but differs in details related to our size, metabolic rate, and lifestyle. Our brain is disproportionately large relative to our body size, reflecting the importance of cognitive abilities in human evolution. Our upright posture creates unique challenges for cardiovascular function, requiring special adaptations to maintain blood flow to the brain against gravity. Our capacity for language, abstract thought, and culture arises from neural circuits that, while built from the same components as those in other animals, are organized in ways that enable uniquely human capabilities. Understanding physiology thus connects us both to the broader community of life and to our distinctive human nature. It reveals the mechanisms that make experience possible, the sensations we feel, the movements we make, the thoughts we think. It shows how the physical processes occurring in our bodies give rise to the phenomenon of being alive, of existing as conscious entities embedded in the world, and it invites a sense of wonder at the complexity, elegance, and resilience of the systems that sustain us. As this first part of our journey draws toward a close, take a moment to return your awareness to your own body. Feel again the rhythm of your breath, the beating of your heart, the sensations of warmth and contact. These are not abstract concepts, but lived realities, the tangible expressions of the physiology we are exploring. The oxygen entering your lungs right now is binding to hemoglobin in your red blood cells, which are being carried by your circulation to tissues where oxygen will be released, enabling the generation of ATP that powers cellular work. The food you ate earlier is being broken down, its nutrients absorbed and distributed, some used immediately for energy, others stored for future needs. Your body temperature is being maintained within its narrow range through the continuous operation of feedback loops you will never consciously perceive. All of this, and so much more, occurs without requiring your attention, guided by mechanisms of extraordinary precision. In the sections ahead, we will examine these mechanisms in greater detail, building our understanding layer by layer, system by system. We will move from the foundational concepts we have established to more specific explorations of how each system operates, how they interact, and how they enable the remarkable capabilities of the human body. The journey continues, unhurried, purposeful, revealing the landscape of physiology in a way that allows the knowledge to settle naturally into understanding. We have walked gently through the foundations, the principles of homeostasis, the levels of organization, the concepts of feedback and integration that underlie all physiological function. Now we continue by observing how these principles manifest in the body's major systems, each one a marvel of coordination, each one contributing its essential voice to the symphony of life. Let us begin with the cardiovascular system, the river network that flows without pause through every landscape of the body. This system is built around a central truth. Cells require a continuous supply of nutrients and oxygen, and they continuously produce wastes that must be removed. Individual cells cannot travel to obtain what they need or dispose of what they produce. Instead, the body brings resources to the cells and carries wastes away through the circulation of blood. At the heart of this system is the organ for which it is named, the heart itself, a muscular pump about the size of a closed fist, positioned slightly left of center in the chest cavity. The heart is a tireless worker, contracting approximately 70 times per minute at rest, more than 100,000 times per day, nearly 3 billion times over an average lifespan. Each contraction propels blood into the vast network of vessels that reaches every tissue in the body. The heart consists of 4 chambers arranged in 2 pairs. The upper chambers, called atria, receive blood returning from the body and lungs. The lower chambers, called ventricles, generate the force that propels blood out into the circulation. The right atrium receives oxygen-depleted blood from the body, blood that has delivered its oxygen to tissues and picked up carbon dioxide, the waste product of cellular respiration. This blood flows into the right ventricle, which contracts to push it into the pulmonary arteries, vessels that carry blood to the lungs. In the lungs, blood releases carbon dioxide and picks up fresh oxygen, then returns to the heart via pulmonary veins, entering the left atrium. From there, it moves into the left ventricle, the most muscular chamber of the heart, which contracts forcefully to propel oxygen-rich blood into the aorta, the largest artery in the body, beginning its journey to all the tissues. This pathway creates 2 circuits: the pulmonary circulation, which carries blood between the heart and lungs, and the systemic circulation, which carries blood between the heart and all other tissues. The right side of the heart powers the pulmonary circulation, while the left side powers the systemic circulation. Because the systemic circulation must push blood through a much larger and more distant network of vessels, the left ventricle has thicker walls and generates greater pressure than the right ventricle. Yet both sides pump the same volume of blood with each beat, maintaining balance between the 2 circuits. The heart's chambers are separated by valves that ensure blood flows in only one direction. Between each atrium and ventricle are atrioventricular valves, the tricuspid valve on the right side, the mitral valve on the left. These valves open when the atria contract, allowing blood to flow into the ventricles, then close when the ventricles contract, preventing blood from flowing backward into the atria. At the exits of the ventricles are semilunar valves, the pulmonary valve leading from the right ventricle, the aortic valve from the left. These open when the ventricles contract, allowing blood to be ejected into the arteries, then close when the ventricles relax, preventing blood from flowing back into the heart. The closing of these valves produces the familiar sounds of the heartbeat, the lub from the closing of the atrioventricular valves, the dub from the closing of the semilunar valves. The heart's rhythmic contraction is generated by specialized cardiac muscle cells that possess an intrinsic ability to contract without external stimulation. These cells depolarize spontaneously, creating electrical signals that spread through the heart, triggering coordinated contractions. The rhythm originates in a cluster of cells in the right atrium called the sinoatrial node, often referred to as the heart's natural pacemaker. From there, the electrical signal spreads across both atria, causing them to contract almost simultaneously. The signal then reaches the atrioventricular node, a second cluster of specialized cells located between the atria and ventricles. Here, the signal is briefly delayed, allowing the atria to finish contracting and the ventricles to fill with blood before ventricular contraction begins. From the atrioventricular node, the signal travels rapidly down specialized conducting fibers to the apex of the heart, then spreads upward through the ventricular muscle, causing the ventricles to contract from bottom to top. efficiently ejecting blood into the arteries. This electrical activity can be measured at the body's surface using electrodes placed on the skin, producing a recording called an electrocardiogram. The characteristic waves of an electrocardiogram reflect the depolarization and repolarization of different parts of the heart, providing information about the heart's rhythm and electrical health. But even without such measurement, the heart maintains its beat, governed by its internal pacemaker, adjusted by signals from the nervous and endocrine systems to meet the body's changing needs. The nervous system exerts continuous influence over heart rate through two divisions of the autonomic nervous system, which controls involuntary functions. The sympathetic division increases heart rate and strengthens contractions, preparing the body for activity. The parasympathetic division, working through the vagus nerve, slows heart rate and reduces contraction force, promoting rest and recovery. At any given moment, the actual heart rate reflects the balance between these opposing influences. During exercise or stress, sympathetic activity increases and parasympathetic activity decreases, accelerating the heart. During relaxation or sleep, parasympathetic activity predominates, slowing the heart. This ongoing adjustment ensures that cardiac output, the volume of blood pumped per minute, matches the body's metabolic demands. Hormones also modulate cardiac function. Epinephrine, released from the adrenal glands during stress or excitement, binds to receptors on heart muscle cells, increasing both heart rate and contraction strength. Thyroid hormones regulate the baseline metabolic rate and influence the heart's responsiveness to other signals. Various other hormones affect blood volume, vessel diameter, and other factors that influence how hard the heart works to maintain adequate circulation. From the heart, blood flows into arteries, vessels with thick, muscular walls capable of withstanding the high pressure generated by ventricular contraction. The largest arteries, like the aorta, have walls containing elastic fibers that stretch during each heartbeat, then recoil during the pause between beats. This elasticity helps maintain continuous blood flow, even though the heart pumps in pulses. As arteries branch and rebranch, they become progressively smaller, eventually forming arterioles, the smallest arteries, which serve as the primary regulators of blood flow to different tissues. Arterioles have muscular walls that can constrict or dilate, altering their resistance to blood flow. When an arteriole constricts, resistance increases and less blood flows to the tissue it supplies. When it dilates, resistance decreases and more blood flows through. This ability to adjust blood flow is crucial for distributing cardiac output according to need. During exercise, arterioles and skeletal muscles dilate, allowing increased flow to support heightened activity, while arterioles in the digestive system constrict, redirecting blood to where it is needed most. After a meal, the pattern reverses with increased flow to the digestive organs and relatively less to the muscles. These adjustments occur continuously, orchestrated by local chemical signals, neural input, and circulating hormones. Beyond the arterioles lie the capillaries, the smallest vessels in the circulatory system, with walls just 1 cell thick. Capillaries form dense networks that penetrate every tissue, bringing blood into close proximity with cells. The thin capillary walls allow for the exchange of materials between blood and interstitial fluid. Oxygen and nutrients diffuse from blood into the fluids surrounding cells, while carbon dioxide and other wastes diffuse from the interstitial fluid into the blood. This exchange is the fundamental purpose of the cardiovascular system: to bring the internal transport medium, blood, close enough to cells that diffusion can supply their needs and remove their wastes. Not all materials cross capillary walls by simple diffusion. Some capillaries have pores that allow larger molecules and even small proteins to pass through. Others have specialized transport mechanisms that move specific substances across the endothelial cells that form the capillary wall. The permeability of capillaries varies depending on the tissue. Capillaries in the brain are notably impermeable, forming the blood-brain barrier that protects neural tissue from potentially harmful substances in the blood. Capillaries in the kidneys and intestines are more permeable, facilitating the exchange of materials needed for filtration and absorption. The movement of fluid between blood and interstitial space is also influenced by pressure gradients. Blood pressure within capillaries tends to push fluid out through the capillary wall into the interstitial space. This outward force is opposed by osmotic pressure, created primarily by proteins in the blood that cannot easily cross the capillary wall. These proteins draw water back into the capillaries. At the arterial end of a capillary, where blood pressure is higher, the outward force exceeds the inward pull, and fluid moves from blood into the interstitial space. At the venous end, where blood pressure has dropped, osmotic pressure predominates, and fluid moves from the interstitial space back into the blood. This creates a gentle circulation of fluid through the tissues, bringing fresh nutrients and removing wastes. Some fluid remains in the interstitial space rather than returning to the blood capillaries. This excess fluid is collected by another network of vessels called the lymphatic system. Lymphatic capillaries have one-way valves and highly permeable walls that allow interstitial fluid, now called lymph, to enter. The lymph flows through progressively larger lymphatic vessels, passing through lymph nodes where immune cells monitor for pathogens and foreign substances. Eventually, the lymph returns to the bloodstream at large veins near the heart, completing the cycle. The lymphatic system thus serves dual roles: maintaining fluid balance by returning excess interstitial fluid to the circulation, and supporting immune function by filtering lymph and housing immune cells. After passing through capillaries, blood enters venules, the smallest veins, which merge into progressively larger veins that carry blood back toward the heart. Veins have thinner walls than arteries and operate under much lower pressure. Many veins, especially those in the limbs, contain one-way valves that prevent blood from flowing backward. The return of blood to the heart through veins is aided by several mechanisms. Contraction of skeletal muscles surrounding veins compresses them, pushing blood toward the heart. The muscular pump. Breathing creates pressure changes in the chest cavity that draw blood toward the heart. The respiratory pump. And the veins themselves can constrict slightly, reducing their capacity and helping maintain venous return. These mechanisms ensure that the volume of blood returning to the heart matches the volume being pumped out, maintaining cardiovascular balance. The blood itself is a remarkable tissue, unique in being fluid rather than solid. It consists of cells and cell fragments suspended in a liquid matrix called plasma. Plasma is mostly water but contains dissolved proteins, nutrients, hormones, gases, electrolytes, and waste products. The proteins include albumins, which contribute to osmotic pressure and transport various substances. Globulins, including antibodies that defend against pathogens. And fibrinogen, essential for blood clotting. The cellular components of blood include red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells, also called erythrocytes, are by far the most numerous, with approximately 5 million in every microliter of blood. These cells are highly specialized for oxygen transport. They lack a nucleus and most organelles, maximizing space for hemoglobin, the protein that binds oxygen. Hemoglobin contains iron atoms that give blood its red color and provide the binding sites for oxygen molecules. Each red blood cell contains about 280 million hemoglobin molecules, each capable of carrying 4 oxygen molecules. This allows blood to transport far more oxygen than could be dissolved in plasma alone. Red blood cells have a distinctive biconcave disc shape, appearing like a dimpled cushion rather than a sphere. This shape increases surface area relative to volume, enhancing gas exchange, and provides flexibility, allowing the cells to squeeze through capillaries narrower than their own diameter. Red blood cells live for approximately 120 days, during which they make countless trips through the circulation. Old or damaged red blood cells are removed by the spleen and liver, and the iron from their hemoglobin is recycled for use in new red blood cells produced continuously in the bone marrow. White blood cells, or leukocytes, are far less numerous than red blood cells, but play crucial roles in immune defense. There are several types, each with specific functions. Neutrophils are the most abundant white blood cells, serving as the body's first line of cellular defense against bacterial infections. They can leave blood vessels and migrate to sites of infection, where they engulf and destroy bacteria. Lymphocytes include B cells, which produce antibodies, and T cells, which coordinate immune responses and directly attack infected or cancerous cells. Monocytes leave the bloodstream and mature into macrophages, large cells that engulf pathogens and cellular debris. Eosinophils defend against parasitic infections and are involved in allergic responses. Basophils release histamine and other chemicals that mediate inflammation. Together, these cells provide a layered defense system capable of responding to diverse threats. Platelets are not complete cells, but fragments of larger cells produced in the bone marrow. When blood vessels are damaged, platelets adhere to the site of injury, becoming activated and releasing chemical signals that attract more platelets. They aggregate to form a temporary plug that helps stop bleeding. Simultaneously, the coagulation cascade activates, a series of enzymatic reactions involving proteins dissolved in plasma. This cascade culminates in the conversion of fibrinogen into fibrin, long protein strands that form a mesh reinforcing the platelet plug and creating a stable clot. Once the vessel wall is repaired, other enzymes dissolve the clot, restoring normal blood flow. This elegant system balances the need to prevent blood loss with the need to maintain fluid circulation. Blood pressure, the force that blood exerts against vessel walls, is a carefully regulated variable. It is highest in the arteries leaving the heart, where it must be strong enough to drive blood through the entire systemic circulation, and lowest in the veins returning to the heart. Blood pressure is conventionally measured in the brachial artery of the arm and expressed as 2 numbers: systolic pressure, the peak pressure during ventricular contraction, and diastolic pressure, the lowest pressure during ventricular relaxation. Typical values for a healthy adult are around 120 millimeters of mercury systolic and 80 diastolic. Several factors determine blood pressure. Cardiac output, the volume of blood pumped by the heart per minute, directly influences pressure. More output raises pressure. Peripheral resistance determined largely by the diameter of arterioles, also affects pressure. Narrower vessels increase resistance and raise pressure. Blood volume influences pressure as well. More volume means more fluid pressing against vessel walls. The body regulates blood pressure through mechanisms that adjust these variables. Short-term regulation occurs through baroreceptors, pressure-sensitive receptors in the walls of large arteries, particularly the carotid arteries in the neck and the aorta. When blood pressure rises, these receptors increase their firing rate, sending signals to cardiovascular control centers in the brainstem. In response, parasympathetic activity to the heart increases and sympathetic activity decreases, slowing the heart and reducing cardiac output. Simultaneously, sympathetic signals to arterioles decrease, causing vasodilation and reducing peripheral resistance. These changes lower blood pressure back toward normal. When pressure falls, the opposite responses occur. Heart rate increases, arterioles constrict, and pressure rises. This baroreceptor reflex operates continuously, making rapid adjustments to maintain stable blood pressure despite changes in body position, activity level, and other factors. Longer-term regulation involves the kidneys and the endocrine system. When blood pressure or blood volume is low, the kidneys release an enzyme called renin into the bloodstream. Renin initiates a cascade that produces angiotensin II, a hormone with multiple effects. It constricts blood vessels, raising peripheral resistance. It stimulates the adrenal glands to release aldosterone, which promotes sodium and water retention by the kidneys, increasing blood volume. And it triggers thirst and the release of another hormone, vasopressin, which also promotes water retention. These effects work together to raise blood pressure over hours to days. When blood pressure or volume is adequate, renin release decreases and these mechanisms subside. The integration of cardiovascular function illustrates principles we will see throughout physiology. Multiple control mechanisms operate simultaneously at different timescales. Neural reflexes acting in seconds, hormonal responses unfolding over minutes to hours. Feedback loops maintain variables within normal ranges while allowing appropriate responses to changing demands. And the cardiovascular system does not function in isolation, but coordinates with other systems. The respiratory system supplies oxygen and removes carbon dioxide. The digestive system provides nutrients. The urinary system regulates fluid and electrolyte balance. The nervous and endocrine systems control cardiovascular responses to the body's needs. As we turn our attention to the respiratory system, we find a system intimately linked with the cardiovascular system, the two working in partnership to ensure that every cell receives oxygen and that carbon dioxide is eliminated. While the cardiovascular system transports gases through the body, the respiratory system exchanges them with the environment. Together, they form what might be called the cardiopulmonary system, essential for sustaining the aerobic metabolism that powers most cellular activities. The respiratory system consists of the airways that conduct air into and out of the body, and the lungs, where gas exchange occurs. Air enters through the nose or mouth and passes through the pharynx, a shared passage for air and food. It then enters the larynx, which contains the vocal cords and serves as the gateway to the lower airways. Below the larynx is the trachea, a tube reinforced with C-shaped rings of cartilage that prevent it from collapsing. The trachea descends into the chest and divides into two primary bronchi, one leading to each lung. Within the lungs, the bronchi branch repeatedly, forming a tree-like structure with progressively smaller airways. The primary bronchi divide into secondary bronchi, which divide into tertiary bronchi, which divide into smaller bronchioles. The smallest bronchioles, called terminal bronchioles, lead to respiratory bronchioles, which have occasional alveoli budding from their walls. Finally, the airways terminate in alveolar sacs, clusters of alveoli where gas exchange occurs. The alveoli are tiny, thin-walled air sacs, so small that the lungs contain approximately 300 million of them. Despite their individual small size, together they create an enormous surface area for gas exchange, roughly the area of a tennis court compressed into the chest cavity. Each alveolus is surrounded by a dense network of capillaries. Between the air in the alveolus and the blood in the capillaries are two extremely thin layers, the alveolar epithelium and the capillary endothelium. Together, these layers form a barrier less than 1 micrometer thick in some places. Oxygen and carbon dioxide cross this barrier by diffusion, driven by concentration gradients. Blood arriving at the alveoli from the right heart is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. Oxygen concentration in the alveolar air is higher than in the blood, so oxygen diffuses from the alveoli into the blood where it binds to hemoglobin in red blood cells. Carbon dioxide concentration is higher in the blood than in the alveolar air, so carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood into the alveoli, from where it is exhaled. Oxygenated blood then returns to the left heart to be pumped to the body's tissues. At the tissues, the gradients reverse. Oxygen concentration is higher in the blood than in the cells, so oxygen diffuses into the tissues. Carbon dioxide concentration is higher in the tissues than in the blood, so carbon dioxide diffuses into the blood for transport back to the lungs. This continuous exchange of gases sustains cellular respiration. The efficiency of gas exchange depends on matching ventilation, the flow of air into and out of the alveoli, with perfusion, the flow of blood through the pulmonary capillaries. If an alveolus is well ventilated but poorly perfused, the oxygen it contains cannot efficiently enter the bloodstream. If it is well perfused but poorly ventilated, the blood passing by cannot pick up adequate oxygen or release adequate carbon dioxide. The respiratory system employs mechanisms to optimize this matching. When oxygen levels in a region of the lung are low, local blood vessels constrict, redirecting blood to better ventilated areas. When carbon dioxide levels rise, local airways dilate, increasing ventilation to that region. These adjustments occur automatically, fine-tuning the relationship between airflow and blood flow. The movement of air into and out of the lungs occurs through breathing, driven by changes in the pressure within the thoracic cavity. The lungs themselves have no muscle tissue. They are elastic structures that expand and contract passively in response to pressure changes created by the respiratory muscles. The primary muscle of breathing is the diaphragm, a dome-shaped sheet of muscle that forms the floor of the thoracic cavity. When the diaphragm contracts, it flattens and moves downward, increasing the volume of the thoracic cavity. This expansion reduces the pressure inside the cavity below atmospheric pressure, and air flows into the lungs along this pressure gradient. When the diaphragm relaxes, it returns to its dome shape. The thoracic cavity volume decreases, pressure rises, and air flows out of the lungs. At rest, exhalation is a passive process, driven by the elastic recoil of the lungs and chest wall. During exercise or forced breathing, additional muscles participate. The external intercostals, located between the ribs, assist with inhalation by lifting the rib cage. The internal intercostals and abdominal muscles assist with exhalation by compressing the thoracic and abdominal cavities. The rhythm of breathing is controlled by neural networks in the brainstem, particularly in regions called the medulla oblongata and pons. Neurons in these regions generate rhythmic signals that stimulate the diaphragm and other respiratory muscles, creating the automatic pattern of inhalation and exhalation that continues even during sleep or unconsciousness. The rate and depth of breathing are adjusted based on the body's needs, primarily through chemoreceptors that monitor levels of carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH in the blood. The most influential signal is carbon dioxide. As cells produce carbon dioxide through metabolism, it enters the blood and is transported to the lungs. Carbon dioxide reacts with water in the blood to form carbonic acid, which dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. The accumulation of hydrogen ions lowers blood pH, making it more acidic. Central chemoreceptors in the brainstem detect changes in the pH of the cerebrospinal fluid, which reflects blood carbon dioxide levels. When carbon dioxide rises and pH falls, these receptors signal the respiratory centers to increase ventilation. Breathing becomes deeper and faster, expelling more carbon dioxide and bringing pH back toward normal. When carbon dioxide levels drop, ventilation decreases. This negative feedback loop maintains carbon dioxide and pH within narrow ranges. Peripheral chemoreceptors, located in the carotid and aortic bodies, monitor oxygen levels in the blood. Under normal circumstances, oxygen levels remain high enough that these receptors contribute little to the control of breathing. However, if oxygen levels fall significantly, such as at high altitude where atmospheric oxygen is lower, the peripheral chemoreceptors increase their activity, stimulating increased ventilation. This response helps maintain adequate oxygen delivery to tissues despite the reduced availability. Breathing is also influenced by voluntary control and by reflexes. You can consciously hold your breath or alter your breathing pattern, though the automatic control eventually overrides conscious efforts if carbon dioxide rises too high. Irritants in the airways trigger coughing or sneezing reflexes that help clear the passages. Sudden immersion in cold water triggers a gasp reflex. During speech, breathing patterns are modified to allow for vocalization. These various influences are integrated in the respiratory control centers, which generate a breathing pattern appropriate to the circumstances. The air we breathe is not pure oxygen, but a mixture of gases. Approximately 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and trace amounts of other gases, including carbon dioxide. Nitrogen is biologically inert at normal pressures and simply moves in and out of the lungs without participating in gas exchange. The partial pressure of oxygen in atmospheric air is sufficient to drive diffusion into the blood, but the efficiency of this process depends on maintaining the health of the respiratory system. The airways and lungs have several features that protect them and optimize their function. The airways are lined with epithelial cells, many of which have tiny hair-like projections called cilia. These cilia beat in coordinated waves, moving mucus produced by goblet cells in the epithelium upward toward the throat, where it can be swallowed or expelled. This mucociliary escalator traps inhaled particles and pathogens, preventing them from reaching the delicate alveoli. The alveoli produce a substance called surfactant, a mixture of lipids and proteins that reduces surface tension in the fluid lining the alveolar walls. Without surfactant, the alveoli would tend to collapse during exhalation, requiring much greater effort to reinflate them with each breath. Surfactant allows the alveoli to remain partly inflated even at the end of exhalation, making breathing far more efficient. The respiratory system, like the cardiovascular system, demonstrates the principle of integration. It responds to metabolic demands, increasing ventilation during exercise when oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production rise. It interacts with the cardiovascular system, with changes in breathing affecting heart rate and blood pressure. It participates in thermoregulation, with the evaporation of water from the respiratory surfaces contributing to heat loss. It enables vocalization and other behaviors, and it operates largely without conscious awareness. Its automatic rhythms maintained by brainstem circuits while remaining capable of voluntary modification when needed. As we continue this exploration, moving from system to system, patterns emerge. Each system has specialized structures suited to its function. Each employs feedback mechanisms to maintain appropriate levels of activity. Each communicates with other systems through neural and hormonal pathways, and each contributes to the homeostasis of the organism, ensuring that the internal environment remains stable enough to support cellular life while remaining flexible enough to meet changing demands. The journey through physiology reveals not discrete parts, but an interconnected whole, a living system in which every component influences and is influenced by others. The heart pumps blood, but the rate at which it pumps is determined by signals from the brain and hormones from endocrine glands responding to information about blood pressure, oxygen levels, physical activity, and emotional state. The lungs exchange gases, but how rapidly they do so is adjusted based on carbon dioxide levels detected by chemoreceptors, modified by commands from motor cortex during speech, and influenced by the mechanical effects of cardiovascular function. This web of interactions, this continuous conversation between parts, is what creates the unified phenomenon of the living organism. In the distance ahead lie more systems to explore, more mechanisms to understand, more connections to discover. The digestive system awaits with its transformation of food into absorbable nutrients. The urinary system calls with its precise regulation of fluid composition and volume. The nervous system beckons with its intricate networks for sensing and responding. The endocrine system invites attention with its chemical messengers coordinating functions across time and space. The muscular and skeletal systems stand ready to reveal how movement is generated and controlled. And throughout, the theme of integration will continue, showing how these systems work not in isolation, but in concert, creating the harmony of physiological function that sustains life. We have journeyed through the cardiovascular system's ceaseless circulation and the respiratory system's rhythmic exchange of gases. We have seen how these systems partner to deliver oxygen and remove carbon dioxide, supporting the metabolic fires that burn in every cell. Now we continue deeper into the body's landscape, exploring how nutrients are obtained, how wastes are eliminated, and how information flows through the nervous system's vast communication network. The digestive system is a remarkable transformation apparatus, a passage where complex foods are broken down into molecules simple enough to cross into the bloodstream. This system extends from the mouth to the anus, forming a tube that traverses the body while technically remaining outside it. The lumen of the digestive tract is continuous with the external environment, separated from the body's interior by epithelial barriers. The journey of food begins in the mouth, where mechanical and chemical digestion commence simultaneously. Teeth break food into smaller pieces, increasing surface area for enzymatic action. Saliva, secreted by 3 pairs of salivary glands, moistens food and begins chemical breakdown. Saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase that initiates the digestion of starch, breaking it into smaller carbohydrate fragments. Saliva also contains mucus that lubricates food, antibacterial compounds that provide some protection against pathogens, and substances that dissolve food molecules so they can interact with taste receptors on the tongue. The tongue manipulates food, mixing it with saliva and forming it into a soft mass called a bolus. When swallowing begins, the tongue pushes the bolus backward into the pharynx. This triggers an automatic sequence of events coordinated by neural circuits in the brainstem. The soft palate rises to close off the nasal passages. The larynx elevates and the epiglottis folds down over its opening, preventing food from entering the airways. Muscles in the pharynx contract in sequence, propelling the bolus downward into the esophagus. This coordinated swallowing reflex occurs in about 1 second, protecting the airways while moving food toward the stomach. The esophagus is a muscular tube that conducts food from the pharynx to the stomach through rhythmic contractions called peristalsis. Circular muscle in the esophageal wall contracts in waves that progress downward, squeezing the bolus ahead of them like toothpaste through a tube. This process is so effective that you could swallow while upside down and food would still reach your stomach, propelled by muscle contraction rather than gravity. At the junction between the esophagus and stomach is a muscular ring called the lower esophageal sphincter, which normally remains contracted to prevent stomach contents from flowing backward into the esophagus. When the peristaltic wave reaches this sphincter, it relaxes, allowing food to enter the stomach. The stomach serves as a temporary storage chamber where food is mixed with gastric juice and partially digested before being released in controlled amounts into the small intestine. The stomach wall contains millions of gastric glands that secrete hydrochloric acid, enzymes, and other substances. The acid creates an extremely acidic environment with a pH around 2. Acidic enough to kill most bacteria that enter with food and to denature proteins, unfolding them and making them more accessible to digestive enzymes. The primary enzyme in gastric juice is pepsin, which breaks proteins into smaller fragments called peptides. The stomach wall also secretes mucus that forms a protective layer, preventing the acid and enzymes from digesting the stomach itself. This mucus barrier is constantly renewed as the cells producing it and the epithelial lining beneath are replaced every few days. When this protective mechanism is compromised, the stomach lining can be damaged, potentially leading to ulcers. The stomach's protection is enhanced by bicarbonate secretion beneath the mucus layer, which neutralizes any acid that penetrates through. Smooth muscle in the stomach wall contracts in waves, churning the food and mixing it thoroughly with gastric juice. This mechanical action combined with chemical digestion converts solid food into a semi-liquid mixture called chyme. The pyloric sphincter at the stomach's exit controls the release of chyme into the small intestine, opening periodically to allow small amounts through. This regulated emptying ensures that the small intestine is not overwhelmed and has time to process each portion of chyme completely. The small intestine is where most digestion and absorption occur. It is a coiled tube approximately 6 meters long in adults, with a surface area vastly increased by structural modifications at multiple scales. The inner wall is arranged in circular folds, and these folds are covered with millions of tiny finger-like projections called villi. Each villus is further covered with even tinier projections called microvilli, creating what is termed a brush border. Together, these modifications increase the surface area to approximately 200 square meters, roughly the size of a tennis court, all folded within the abdominal cavity. The small intestine consists of 3 segments. The duodenum, the first and shortest segment, receives chyme from the stomach along with secretions from 2 accessory organs, the pancreas and the liver. The jejunum, the middle segment, is the primary site of nutrient absorption. The ileum, the final segment, completes absorption and transfers remaining material to the large intestine. The pancreas produces pancreatic juice containing bicarbonate and multiple digestive enzymes. The bicarbonate neutralizes the acidic chyme coming from the stomach, raising the pH to a level where intestinal enzymes can function optimally. Pancreatic enzymes include proteases that continue protein digestion, pancreatic amylase that digests carbohydrates, and lipase that breaks down fats into fatty acids and glycerol. These enzymes are secreted in inactive forms and activated only after entering the intestinal lumen, preventing them from digesting the pancreas itself. The liver produces bile, a fluid containing bile salts that emulsify fats, breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones. This emulsification increases the surface area available for lipase to act upon, greatly enhancing fat digestion. Bile also contains cholesterol, phospholipids, and waste products like bilirubin, a breakdown product of hemoglobin from old red blood cells. Bile is secreted continuously by the liver and stored in the gallbladder, a small sac beneath the liver. When fatty food enters the duodenum, hormonal signals trigger the gallbladder to contract, releasing concentrated bile into the intestine through the common bile duct. The digestion of food is thus a collaborative effort involving multiple organs and numerous enzymes, each specific for particular chemical bonds. Carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides like glucose. Proteins are reduced to amino acids and small peptides. Fats become fatty acids and monoglycerides. Nucleic acids are digested into nucleotides. These smaller molecules can then be absorbed across the intestinal epithelium into the bloodstream or, in the case of fats, into the lymphatic system. Absorption occurs primarily through the epithelial cells lining the villi. Different nutrients use different transport mechanisms. Glucose and amino acids are absorbed through specific carrier proteins in the epithelial cell membranes, often using energy or coupling to sodium transport. Fatty acids and monoglycerides, being lipid-soluble, can diffuse across cell membranes. Once inside the epithelial cells, fatty acids and monoglycerides are reassembled into triglycerides, packaged with proteins into particles called chylomicrons, and released into the lymphatic vessels within the villi. From there, they eventually reach the bloodstream. Water-soluble nutrients like glucose and amino acids pass directly into the blood capillaries in the villi, and the blood from the small intestine does not immediately enter the general circulation. Instead, it flows through the hepatic portal vein to the liver, giving the liver first access to absorbed nutrients. This arrangement allows the liver to regulate nutrient levels, storing excess glucose as glycogen, processing amino acids, and metabolizing various substances before they reach the rest of the body. The liver is a metabolic hub, performing hundreds of functions including nutrient processing, detoxification of harmful substances, production of plasma proteins, and storage of vitamins and minerals. The small intestine also secretes hormones that regulate digestive processes. When acidic chyme enters the duodenum, cells in the intestinal wall release secretin, which stimulates the pancreas to secrete bicarbonate-rich fluid. When fats and proteins arrive, another hormone called cholecystokinin is released, stimulating the pancreas to secrete enzymes and the gallbladder to contract. These hormones coordinate the activities of different digestive organs, ensuring that secretions are produced when needed rather than continuously. By the time material reaches the end of the small intestine, most nutrients have been absorbed. What remains is water, indigestible material like fiber, bacteria, and cellular debris. This material enters the large intestine, also called the colon, which is shorter but wider than the small intestine. The large intestine's primary functions are to absorb water and electrolytes, converting the liquid material from the small intestine into semi-solid feces, and to house trillions of bacteria that constitute the intestinal microbiome. The microbiome consists of hundreds of species of bacteria living in a complex ecosystem within the large intestine. These bacteria ferment indigestible carbohydrates, producing short-chain fatty acids that the colon's epithelial cells can absorb and use for energy. They synthesize certain vitamins, particularly vitamin K and some B vitamins, which the body absorbs. They compete with potentially harmful bacteria, helping prevent infection. And they interact with the immune system in ways that influence immune development and function. The relationship between humans and intestinal bacteria is mutualistic. We provide them with a warm, nutrient-rich environment, and they provide us with metabolic capabilities we lack and contribute to our health. The large intestine absorbs water gradually as material moves through its segments: the ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, and sigmoid colon. By the time feces reach the rectum, the final segment of the digestive tract, they have a semi-solid consistency. The rectum normally remains empty, but when feces enter, they stretch the rectal wall, triggering the defecation reflex. Internal and external anal sphincters control the elimination of feces, with the external sphincter under voluntary control, allowing defecation to be postponed until socially appropriate. The digestive system exemplifies several physiological principles. It demonstrates specialization. Different regions have different structures suited to their specific functions. It shows coordination. Neural and hormonal signals ensure that secretions and movements are appropriately timed. It illustrates feedback regulation. The presence of food triggers secretions that digest it, and as digestion proceeds and food is absorbed, these secretions diminish. And it reveals integration. The digestive system does not operate independently, but coordinates with the cardiovascular system for nutrient transport, the nervous system for control of motility and secretion, and the endocrine system for hormonal regulation. While the digestive system brings materials into the body, the urinary system removes them, maintaining the composition of body fluids within precise limits. The kidneys are the central organs of this system, performing filtration and selective reabsorption to produce urine while regulating water balance, electrolyte concentrations, acid-base balance, and blood pressure. Each kidney contains approximately 1 million functional units called nephrons. A nephron consists of a filtering component called the glomerulus and a long tubule where filtrate is processed. Blood enters the glomerulus through an afferent arteriole and flows through a network of capillaries before leaving via an efferent arteriole. The glomerular capillaries are unusually permeable, and blood pressure forces fluid and small solutes out of the blood into a surrounding capsule, beginning the formation of filtrate. This filtrate contains water, electrolytes, glucose, amino acids, urea, and other small molecules, but not proteins or blood cells, which are too large to cross the filtration barrier. The filtrate flows from the capsule into the proximal tubule, the first segment of the nephron's tubular system. Here, approximately 65% of the filtered water and sodium are reabsorbed back into the blood, along with essentially all the filtered glucose and amino acids. This reabsorption is selective. Valuable substances are reclaimed while wastes remain in the tubule. The proximal tubule also secretes certain substances from blood into the tubular fluid, including hydrogen ions, drugs, and metabolic waste products. From the proximal tubule, filtrate enters the loop of Henle, a hairpin-shaped segment that descends into the kidney's inner region and then ascends back toward the outer region. The loop of Henle creates a concentration gradient in the surrounding tissue, which is essential for the kidney's ability to produce concentrated urine when water conservation is necessary. The descending limb of the loop is permeable to water but not to salt, allowing water to leave the tubule. The ascending limb is impermeable to water but actively transports salt out of the tubule into the surrounding tissue. This countercurrent multiplication system establishes an osmotic gradient that draws water out of the collecting ducts, concentrating the urine. The filtrate next enters the distal tubule, where further adjustments occur. Sodium reabsorption continues here, regulated by the hormone aldosterone. Potassium secretion also occurs in the distal tubule, with the amount secreted adjusted to match dietary intake and maintain appropriate blood levels. Hydrogen ion secretion in the distal tubule contributes to acid-base regulation. Finally, filtrate flows into collecting ducts, which descend through the kidney toward the renal pelvis, passing through the concentrated interstitial fluid created by the loops of Henle. The permeability of the collecting ducts to water is regulated by the hormone vasopressin, also called antidiuretic hormone. When vasopressin levels are high, the collecting ducts become very permeable to water. Water leaves the tubule by osmosis, drawn into the concentrated surrounding tissue, and is then reabsorbed into the blood. This produces a small volume of concentrated urine, conserving water. When vasopressin levels are low, the collecting ducts remain relatively impermeable to water. Water remains in the tubule, producing a large volume of dilute urine. This mechanism allows the kidneys to adjust urine concentration based on the body's state of hydration. The regulation of vasopressin secretion occurs through osmoreceptors in the hypothalamus that detect changes in blood osmolarity. When blood becomes too concentrated, when the body is dehydrated, these receptors trigger increased vasopressin release from the posterior pituitary gland. Vasopressin acts on the kidneys to conserve water and also stimulates thirst, prompting fluid intake. When blood osmolarity is normal or low, vasopressin secretion decreases, allowing excess water to be eliminated. This negative feedback loop maintains blood osmolarity within a narrow range. The kidneys filter approximately 180 liters of blood plasma per day, yet only about 1 to 2 liters of urine are typically produced. This means that more than 99% of the filtered fluid is reabsorbed. The composition of this reabsorption is precisely controlled, allowing the kidneys to eliminate wastes while retaining valuable substances and regulating fluid and electrolyte balance. Urea, the primary nitrogenous waste product in humans, is produced in the liver from amino acids that are broken down for energy or converted to other molecules. Urea is freely filtered at the glomerulus and partially reabsorbed in the tubules, with the remainder excreted in urine. The kidneys also eliminate other metabolic wastes, drugs, and excess substances. Certain substances like creatinine, a breakdown product of muscle metabolism, are filtered and secreted but not reabsorbed, making their concentration in urine a useful indicator of kidney function. The kidneys play a central role in blood pressure regulation through multiple mechanisms. By adjusting sodium and water excretion, they control blood volume, which directly affects blood pressure. Through the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system, they trigger vasoconstriction and sodium retention when blood pressure is low. The kidneys also produce erythropoietin, a hormone that stimulates red blood cell production in bone marrow, and they convert vitamin D into its active form, which regulates calcium absorption in the intestines. Urine produced by the nephrons drains into the renal pelvis, then flows through the ureters, muscular tubes that use peristaltic contractions to propel urine toward the urinary bladder. The bladder is a muscular sac that stores urine until it can be eliminated. As the bladder fills, stretch receptors in its wall send signals to the spinal cord and brain. When the bladder contains several hundred milliliters of urine, the urge to urinate becomes conscious. Voluntary control over an external sphincter allows urination to be postponed. When urination occurs, the bladder muscle contracts and the sphincters relax, expelling urine through the urethra. The urinary system demonstrates the body's commitment to maintaining homeostasis. Despite wide variations in fluid intake, dietary salt, protein consumption, and other factors, the kidneys adjust their function to keep blood composition remarkably constant. They respond to hormonal signals, neural input, and local chemical conditions, fine-tuning their processes moment by moment. The integration of kidney function with cardiovascular regulation, fluid balance, electrolyte homeostasis, and waste elimination illustrates how multiple variables are controlled simultaneously through interconnected mechanisms. As we move from the digestive and urinary systems to the nervous system, we encounter the body's most complex communication network, the system responsible for sensing the environment, processing information, making decisions, and coordinating responses. The nervous system operates with remarkable speed and precision, using electrical signals to transmit information over long distances and chemical signals to communicate between cells. The basic functional unit of the nervous system is the neuron, a cell specialized for generating and conducting electrical signals. Neurons have a distinctive structure suited to their function. The cell body contains the nucleus and most organelles, carrying out the typical metabolic activities of cells. Extending from the cell body are dendrites, branching processes that receive signals from other neurons. Also extending from the cell body is a single axon, which can be very short or extend for more than a meter. The axon transmits signals away from the cell body toward other neurons, muscle cells, or glands. The electrical signals that neurons generate are called action potentials. These are rapid, transient changes in the electrical voltage across the neuron's membrane. At rest, a neuron maintains a voltage difference of about -70 millivolts between its inside and outside, with the inside negative relative to the outside. This resting potential results from the unequal distribution of ions across the membrane maintained by ion pumps and selective permeability. When a neuron is stimulated sufficiently, voltage-gated sodium channels in its membrane open. Sodium ions rush into the cell, driven by both their concentration gradient and the electrical gradient. This influx of positive charge rapidly depolarizes the membrane, driving the voltage toward positive values. This is the rising phase of the action potential. Within a millisecond, the sodium channels inactivate and voltage-gated potassium channels open. Potassium ions flow out of the cell, repolarizing the membrane and even making it briefly more negative than the resting potential. The sodium-potassium pump then works continuously to restore the original ion distributions, maintaining the neuron's readiness to fire again. The action potential is all or none. Once initiated, it proceeds to completion with a consistent magnitude. However, the frequency of action potentials can vary, and this frequency encodes information about stimulus intensity. A strong stimulus triggers a high frequency of action potentials. A weak stimulus produces a lower frequency. Action potentials propagate along the axon like a wave. The depolarization at one location causes voltage-gated sodium channels at adjacent locations to open, triggering depolarization there, which spreads to the next location, and so on. In many axons, this propagation is accelerated by myelin, a fatty insulating material that wraps around the axon in segments, leaving gaps called nodes of Ranvier. Action potentials jump from node to node, a process called saltatory conduction, allowing signals to travel much faster than they would in unmyelinated axons. When an action potential reaches the end of an axon, at a specialized junction called a synapse, it triggers the release of neurotransmitter molecules. These chemical messengers diffuse across the narrow synaptic cleft to the next cell, where they bind to receptors. If the next cell is another neuron, neurotransmitter binding can either make it more likely to fire an action potential, called excitation, or less likely, called inhibition. A single neuron may receive thousands of synaptic inputs, some excitatory and some inhibitory. Whether the neuron fires depends on the summation of all these inputs. There are many different neurotransmitters, each with specific effects. Glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter. Acetylcholine is used at synapses between neurons and skeletal muscle, triggering muscle contraction. Dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine modulate neural activity in various brain regions, influencing mood, attention, motivation, and other functions. After neurotransmitters bind to receptors, they are removed from the synaptic cleft, either by reuptake into the presynaptic neuron, enzymatic breakdown, or diffusion away. This removal ensures that signals are brief and discrete rather than prolonged. The nervous system is organized into two main divisions. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, protected by bone and surrounded by membranes called meninges. The peripheral nervous system includes all neural tissue outside the central nervous system, the nerves that connect the brain and spinal cord to the rest of the body. The the peripheral nervous system is further divided functionally. The somatic division controls voluntary movements and carries sensory information from the skin, muscles, and joints. The autonomic division regulates involuntary functions like heart rate, digestion, and gland secretion. The autonomic division itself has two complementary branches. The sympathetic division, which generally prepares the body for activity and stress, and the parasympathetic division, which generally promotes rest, digestion, and recovery. The spinal cord serves as a conduit for information traveling between the brain and the body, and also processes certain reflexes locally. Sensory information enters the spinal cord through dorsal roots, where the cell bodies of sensory neurons are located in clusters called dorsal root ganglia. Motor commands exit through ventral roots, carried by axons whose cell bodies are in the spinal cord's gray matter. The spinal cord's gray matter, shaped like a butterfly in cross-section, contains neuron cell bodies and synapses. The surrounding white matter contains axons traveling up to the brain or down from the brain, organized into distinct tracts. Reflexes are rapid, automatic responses to stimuli, coordinated by neural circuits in the spinal cord or brainstem. The simplest reflexes involve just two neurons, a sensory neuron that detects a stimulus and a motor neuron that produces a response. Most reflexes involve interneurons between the sensory and motor neurons, allowing for more complex processing. The stretch reflex, which causes a muscle to contract when stretched, helps maintain posture. The withdrawal reflex causes a limb to pull away from painful stimuli, protecting the body from harm. These reflexes occur without conscious thought, though the brain receives information about them and can sometimes override or modify them. The brain is the seat of perception, thought, memory, emotion, and voluntary control. It contains approximately 86 billion neurons and an even greater number of glial cells, which support and protect neurons, regulate the chemical environment, form myelin, and contribute to neural function in ways still being discovered. The brain can be divided into several major regions. The brainstem, continuous with the spinal cord, contains centers that control vital functions like breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. It also contains nuclei that regulate sleep-wake cycles and consciousness. The cerebellum, attached to the back of the brainstem, coordinates movement, maintains balance, and contributes to motor learning. The diencephalon includes the thalamus, a relay station for sensory information traveling to the cerebral cortex, and the hypothalamus, which we have encountered as a regulator of homeostasis, controlling temperature, hunger, thirst, hormone secretion, and autonomic function. The cerebrum, the largest part of the human brain, consists of two hemispheres connected by a bundle of axons called the corpus callosum. The outer layer of each hemisphere is the cerebral cortex, a sheet of gray matter folded into gyri and sulci, ridges and grooves that increase its surface area. Beneath the cortex is white matter, consisting of axons that connect different cortical regions or connect the cortex to other brain structures. Deep within the cerebrum are clusters of gray matter called basal ganglia, involved in movement control, and the limbic system, which processes emotion and memory. Different cortical regions have specialized functions. The primary motor cortex controls voluntary movements, sending commands down the spinal cord to motor neurons. The primary somatosensory cortex receives sensory information from the skin and body, creating a map of bodily sensations. The visual cortex processes information from the eyes, the auditory cortex from the ears. Association areas integrate information from multiple sources, enabling complex cognitive functions like language, reasoning, planning, and decision-making. The brain's ability to process information depends on the connections between neurons, which form circuits of immense complexity. Learning and memory involve changes in synaptic strength. Some synapses become stronger, making certain neural pathways more likely to activate, while others weaken. This synaptic plasticity allows the brain to adapt based on experience, storing information in patterns of connectivity. The nervous system integrates with all other body systems. It receives sensory information from throughout the body: touch, pain, temperature, muscle stretch, joint position, blood pressure, blood chemistry, and more. It processes this information, comparing it to stored patterns, making predictions, and generating appropriate responses. It controls muscle contraction, enabling movement and speech. It regulates autonomic functions, adjusting heart rate, breathing, digestion, and other involuntary processes to match the body's needs. It interacts with the endocrine system, with the hypothalamus controlling the pituitary gland, and with various brain regions responding to hormones. The speed of neural communication, signals traveling at up to 100 meters per second in the fastest axons, allows for rapid responses to changing conditions. The complexity of neural circuits allows for flexible, nuanced behavior rather than rigid, stereotyped responses, and the brain's capacity for learning and memory allows experience to shape future behavior, enabling adaptation over an individual's lifetime. As we observe these systems, digestive, urinary, nervous, we see not separate entities, but parts of an integrated whole. Food provides the energy and building materials that all cells, including neurons, require. The cardiovascular system delivers these nutrients and the oxygen that neurons need in abundant supply. The urinary system maintains the ionic composition of extracellular fluid, which is crucial for neural function. The nervous system, in turn, regulates digestive motility and secretion, controls kidney function, and adjusts cardiovascular activity. Each system both depends on and supports the others, creating a web of interdependence. This integration extends across all levels of organization, from molecules to cells to tissues to organs to systems. Hormones secreted by the digestive tract influence brain regions that regulate appetite. Neural signals from the brain alter kidney function in response to stress. Sensory neurons in blood vessels detect pressure changes and trigger reflexes that adjust both cardiac output and kidney function. The flow of information, energy, and materials through these interconnected pathways maintains the dynamic equilibrium we call homeostasis. The exploration continues, revealing more systems, more mechanisms, more connections. Yet already a picture emerges: the body as a unified phenomenon, its functions arising not from isolated components, but from their continuous interaction, their constant communication, their integration into a coherent, self-regulating whole that maintains itself, responds to challenges, and continues the extraordinary process of living. We have traveled through the body's major systems, observing the cardiovascular river flowing ceaselessly, the respiratory bellows exchanging gases with each breath, the digestive pathway transforming food into fuel, the urinary filters maintaining chemical balance, and the nervous network transmitting information at lightning speed. Now, as our journey moves toward completion, we turn our attention to the remaining systems and, more importantly, to the deeper patterns that unite them all into a single, living whole. The endocrine system operates as the body's slower, more sustained communication network, complementing the rapid precision of neural signaling with chemical messages that travel through the bloodstream, reaching distant targets and producing effects that unfold over minutes, hours, or days. Where the nervous system resembles a telephone network with direct connections and immediate responses, the endocrine system is more like broadcasting, with hormones released into the blood reaching multiple target tissues simultaneously. Hormones are chemical messengers secreted by endocrine glands, ductless organs that release their products directly into the bloodstream rather than through tubes. The major endocrine glands include the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pancreas, and gonads, though many other tissues produce hormones as well. Each hormone has specific target cells, recognized by the presence of receptors that bind the hormone and trigger cellular responses. The pituitary gland, a pea-sized structure hanging from the base of the brain, has been called the master gland because many of its hormones regulate other endocrine glands. The anterior pituitary produces growth hormone, which stimulates growth and metabolism throughout the body. Thyroid-stimulating hormone, which regulates the thyroid gland. Adrenocorticotropic hormone, which controls the adrenal cortex, and hormones that regulate the gonads. The posterior pituitary releases vasopressin, which we have encountered in its role regulating water balance, and oxytocin, which stimulates uterine contractions during childbirth and milk release during nursing. The pituitary itself is controlled by the hypothalamus through releasing and inhibiting hormones that travel the short distance from hypothalamus to pituitary through specialized blood vessels. This hypothalamic pituitary axis demonstrates the integration of nervous and endocrine systems. The hypothalamus receives neural input from throughout the brain and responds by secreting hormones that control the pituitary, which in turn controls other endocrine glands. This hierarchical organization allows the brain to regulate endocrine function based on sensory information, emotional state, circadian rhythms, and other factors. The thyroid gland, located in the neck, produces thyroid hormones that regulate metabolic rate throughout the body. These hormones increase the rate of cellular respiration, heat production, and protein synthesis. They are essential for normal growth and development, particularly of the nervous system. Thyroid hormone secretion is regulated through negative feedback. Thyroid-stimulating hormone from the pituitary stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormones. But when thyroid hormone levels rise, they inhibit further secretion of thyroid-stimulating hormone, creating a stable equilibrium. The parathyroid glands, 4 tiny structures embedded in the thyroid, produce parathyroid hormone, which regulates calcium levels in the blood. Calcium is crucial for many processes, including muscle contraction, nerve function, blood clotting, and bone formation. Parathyroid hormone raises blood calcium by stimulating bone breakdown, increasing calcium absorption in the intestines, and reducing calcium excretion by the kidneys. When blood calcium rises, parathyroid hormone secretion decreases. The thyroid also produces calcitonin, which lowers blood calcium, though its role in humans is less prominent than parathyroid hormone. The adrenal glands, perched atop each kidney, consist of 2 distinct regions. The adrenal medulla, the inner region, produces epinephrine and norepinephrine in response to sympathetic nervous stimulation. These hormones prepare the body for action, increasing heart rate and blood pressure, dilating airways, mobilizing energy stores, and sharpening alertness. The response is rapid, supporting immediate physical or mental performance. The adrenal cortex, the outer region, produces steroid hormones, including cortisol and aldosterone. Cortisol helps regulate metabolism and suppresses inflammation. Its secretion increases during stress, providing sustained support for dealing with challenges. Aldosterone regulates sodium and potassium balance, influencing blood volume and pressure. The pancreas functions as both an exocrine gland, secreting digestive enzymes into the small intestine, and an endocrine gland, secreting hormones into the blood. Scattered throughout the pancreas are clusters of endocrine cells called islets of Langerhans. Beta cells in these islets produce insulin, while alpha cells produce glucagon. These two hormones work antagonistically to regulate blood glucose levels. When blood glucose rises after a meal, insulin secretion increases, promoting glucose uptake by cells, glucose storage as glycogen, and fat synthesis. When blood glucose falls between meals, glucagon secretion increases, stimulating glycogen breakdown and glucose release from the liver. This reciprocal regulation maintains blood glucose within the narrow range necessary for normal cellular function, particularly for the brain, which relies heavily on glucose as its energy source. The gonads, ovaries in females, testes in males, produce sex hormones that regulate reproductive function and influence many other tissues. The ovaries produce estrogens and progesterone, hormones that regulate the menstrual cycle, support pregnancy, and influence bone density, cardiovascular function, and other processes. The testes produce testosterone, which promotes sperm production and male secondary sexual characteristics, while also affecting muscle mass, bone density, and metabolism. Sex hormone secretion is regulated by the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis through complex feedback loops that change across the lifespan and, in females, cycle monthly. Beyond these classical endocrine glands, many other tissues produce hormones. The heart produces atrial natriuretic peptide, which promotes sodium and water excretion by the kidneys. Adipose tissue produces leptin, which signals the brain about energy stores and helps regulate appetite and metabolism. The stomach and intestines produce numerous hormones that regulate digestion. The kidneys produce erythropoietin and renin. Even individual cells throughout the body produce local hormones that affect nearby cells without entering the general circulation. Hormones work through various mechanisms depending on their chemical nature. Steroid hormones, being lipid-soluble, can cross cell membranes and bind to receptors inside cells. The hormone receptor complex then enters the nucleus and influences gene expression, altering which proteins the cell produces. This mechanism produces long-lasting effects but operates relatively slowly, with changes becoming apparent over hours or days. Peptide and protein hormones, being water-soluble, cannot cross cell membranes, and instead bind to receptors on the cell surface. This binding triggers intracellular signaling cascades that alter enzyme activity, ion channel function, or other cellular processes, producing effects that can occur within seconds to minutes. The integration of endocrine and nervous control allows the body to respond appropriately to situations requiring both immediate and sustained responses. When faced with a threat, the sympathetic nervous system triggers rapid physiological changes while simultaneously stimulating the adrenal medulla to release epinephrine, prolonging and intensifying the response. The hypothalamus also activates the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, leading to cortisol release that provides sustained metabolic support. Once the threat passes, parasympathetic activity increases and hormone levels decline, allowing the body to return to baseline. The muscular system provides the capacity for movement, from the beating of the heart to the blinking of eyes to the locomotion that carries us through space. We have already encountered cardiac muscle in the heart and smooth muscle in blood vessels and hollow organs. Now we consider skeletal muscle, the voluntary muscle that attaches to bones and generates the forces that produce body movements. Skeletal muscle tissue consists of long, cylindrical cells called muscle fibers, formed by the fusion of many individual cells during development. Each fiber contains hundreds of nuclei and is packed with myofibrils, the contractile units that generate force. Myofibrils are composed of repeating segments called sarcomeres, which contain precisely arranged filaments of two proteins, thick filaments made of myosin and thin filaments made primarily of actin. The regular arrangement of these filaments creates the striped appearance that gives skeletal muscle its other name, striated muscle. Muscle contraction occurs through the sliding filament mechanism. When a motor neuron releases acetylcholine at the neuromuscular junction, it triggers an action potential that spreads across the muscle fiber membrane and down tubules that penetrate deep into the fiber. This electrical signal causes the release of calcium ions from internal storage sites. Calcium binds to proteins on the actin filaments, exposing binding sites for myosin. The myosin heads attach to actin, forming cross bridges. Using energy from ATP, the myosin heads pivot, pulling the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere. The myosin heads then detach, reset their position, and repeat the cycle, walking along the actin filament and shortening the sarcomere. When many sarcomeres shorten simultaneously throughout a muscle fiber, the entire fiber contracts. When many fibers contract together, the whole muscle generates force. When the nerve signal ceases, calcium is pumped back into storage. The binding sites on actin are covered, cross bridges can no longer form, and the muscle relaxes. This cycle can repeat rapidly, allowing muscles to contract and relax in quick succession or to maintain sustained contractions. The force generated by a muscle depends on how many muscle fibers are activated and how frequently they receive signals. A single action potential produces a brief contraction called a twitch. Repeated stimulation before relaxation is complete causes twitches to some, producing stronger contractions. When stimulation frequency is high enough, the muscle reaches tetanus, a sustained maximal contraction. Motor units, a motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it controls are recruited in order from smallest to largest, allowing fine control of force production. Muscles can only pull, not push, so they are arranged in opposing groups. Flexor muscles bend joints, while extensor muscles straighten them. When one muscle group contracts, the opposing group typically relaxes, coordinated by neural circuits that provide reciprocal inhibition. This arrangement allows smooth, controlled movements. Muscle tissue adapts to use. Regular exercise stimulates muscle fibers to produce more contractile proteins, increasing muscle mass and strength. Endurance training increases the number of mitochondria and capillaries in muscle tissue, enhancing aerobic capacity. Conversely, inactivity leads to muscle atrophy, with decreased protein content and reduced strength. This plasticity allows muscles to match their capabilities to the demands placed upon them. The skeletal system provides the framework that muscles act upon, creating the lever systems that produce movement. Beyond this mechanical function, bones serve as protective structures for vital organs, as storage sites for minerals, and as the location where blood cells are produced. Bone appears static, but is actually dynamic tissue, constantly being remodeled through the coordinated action of two cell types. Osteoblasts build bone by secreting collagen and other proteins that form a matrix, which then becomes mineralized with calcium phosphate crystals, creating hard tissue. Osteoclasts break down bone, dissolving minerals and digesting matrix proteins. In healthy adults, the activities of these cells are balanced, maintaining bone mass while allowing the bone to adapt its structure to mechanical stresses. Regions subjected to greater forces develop more bone, while less stressed regions lose bone mass. This remodeling also allows bones to repair microdamage that accumulates with use and enables the skeleton to serve as a calcium reservoir, releasing calcium into the blood when needed or storing it when abundant. The coordination of bone remodeling involves mechanical signals, hormones, and local factors. Weight-bearing activity stimulates bone formation, which is why exercise helps maintain bone density. Parathyroid hormone and vitamin D regulate calcium homeostasis, influencing bone remodeling. Growth hormone and sex hormones promote bone growth and maintenance. During childhood and adolescence, bone formation exceeds breakdown, allowing bones to grow in length and thickness. In adulthood, formation and breakdown are roughly equal. In later life, particularly after menopause in women when estrogen levels decline, breakdown may exceed formation, gradually reducing bone density. Joints, the connections between bones, vary in structure and mobility. Some joints are immovable, like those between skull bones. Others allow limited movement, like those between vertebrae, where fibrocartilage pads provide cushioning while permitting flexibility. Synovial joints are freely movable, containing a fluid-filled cavity between articulating bone surfaces. The bone ends are covered with smooth cartilage that reduces friction, and the joint is enclosed in a capsule lined with a membrane that produces synovial fluid for lubrication. Ligaments, bands of dense connective tissue, reinforce joints and limit excessive movement that could cause injury. The integumentary system, the skin and associated structures, forms the body's boundary with the external environment. Far from being a simple wrapper, skin is a complex organ with multiple functions. It provides a barrier against water loss, mechanical damage, ultraviolet radiation, and microbial invasion. It participates in temperature regulation through blood flow adjustment and sweat production. It synthesizes vitamin D when exposed to sunlight. It contains sensory receptors that detect touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, and pain, providing information about the external world. Skin consists of two main layers. The epidermis, the outer layer, is composed of epithelial cells arranged in strata. The deepest layer contains actively dividing cells that continuously produce new cells. As these cells move toward the surface, they fill with keratin, a tough protein, and eventually die, forming the outermost layer of dead, flattened cells that are constantly shed and replaced. This keratinized layer provides a waterproof barrier and physical protection. The epidermis also contains melanocytes, cells that produce melanin pigment, which absorbs ultraviolet radiation and determines skin color. The dermis beneath the epidermis consists of dense connective tissue containing blood vessels, nerves, sensory receptors, hair follicles, and glands. Sweat glands produce sweat for evaporative cooling. Sebaceous glands produce oily sebum that lubricates skin and hair. The dermis provides strength and elasticity, housing collagen fibers that resist stretching and elastic fibers that allow skin to return to its shape after being deformed. Beneath the skin lies the hypodermis, a layer of adipose tissue that provides insulation, cushioning, and energy storage. The thickness of this layer varies across the body and between individuals, influenced by genetics, sex, age, and nutrition. Temperature regulation through the skin demonstrates integration across systems. When body temperature rises, thermoreceptors signal the hypothalamus, which activates responses including dilation of skin blood vessels, increasing blood flow to the surface where heat can radiate away, and stimulation of sweat glands, with evaporating sweat carrying heat from the body. When temperature falls, skin blood vessels constrict, reducing heat loss, and if needed, shivering is initiated to generate heat through muscle activity. These responses are coordinated with behavioral changes, adding or removing clothing, seeking warmer or cooler environments, showing how physiological and behavioral mechanisms work together. The immune system defends against pathogens, bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, and other threats. Unlike other systems centered in specific organs, the immune system is distributed throughout the body, with immune cells circulating in blood and lymph, residing in tissues, and concentrated in lymphoid organs like lymph nodes, spleen, and thymus. Immunity operates through multiple layers. Physical and chemical barriers provide the first defense. Skin blocks entry, mucus traps pathogens, stomach acid destroys many ingested microbes. If pathogens breach these barriers, the innate immune system responds quickly but non-specifically. Phagocytic cells engulf and destroy invaders. Natural killer cells attack virus-infected or cancerous cells. Complement proteins circulate in blood and can directly destroy pathogens or mark them for destruction. Inflammation, characterized by redness, heat, swelling, and pain, represents the innate immune response, with increased blood flow bringing immune cells and proteins to sites of infection or injury. The adaptive immune system provides specific, targeted responses and immunological memory. Lymphocytes are the key cells. B lymphocytes produce antibodies, Y-shaped proteins that bind to specific antigens, molecules on the surface of pathogens or foreign substances. Antibody binding can neutralize pathogens, mark them for destruction by phagocytes, or activate complement. T lymphocytes include helper T cells that coordinate immune responses by secreting chemical signals, and cytotoxic T cells that directly kill infected or abnormal cells. The adaptive immune response takes days to develop upon first exposure to a pathogen, as lymphocytes with appropriate receptors must be activated and multiply. But once developed, the response is powerful and specific. More importantly, some activated lymphocytes persist as memory cells, allowing a faster, stronger response if the same pathogen is encountered again. This immunological memory is the basis of vaccination. Exposure to harmless forms of pathogens primes the immune system to respond rapidly to future encounters with dangerous forms. The immune system must distinguish self from non-self, responding to foreign threats while tolerating the body's own tissues. This discrimination is achieved through mechanisms that eliminate or inactivate lymphocytes that react to self-antigens. When these mechanisms fail, autoimmune diseases can result, with the immune system attacking the body's own tissues. Throughout our exploration, we have encountered the theme of regulation, mechanisms that detect deviations from set points and activate responses to restore appropriate values. Temperature, blood pressure, blood glucose, blood pH, calcium levels, water balance, and countless other variables are maintained within narrow ranges through negative feedback. These regulatory systems operate continuously, automatically, largely without conscious awareness. We have also seen the theme of integration. Systems do not function independently, but coordinate through multiple communication pathways. Neural signals provide rapid, precise control. Hormones offer sustained, widespread effects. Local chemical signals coordinate activity within tissues. Mechanical forces influence cellular behavior. Together, these communication mechanisms create a network of interactions that allows the whole organism to respond coherently to challenges. Another recurring pattern is adaptation, the body's ability to adjust to changing demands over different timescales. Immediate adjustments occur through altered activity of existing structures. Heart rate increases during exercise. Blood vessels dilate or constrict. Breathing deepens. Slower adaptations involve changes in the amount or type of cellular machinery. Muscles increase their protein content with training. Bone remodels in response to mechanical stress. Enzymes increase or decrease in response to metabolic demands. These adaptations optimize function for prevailing conditions while maintaining the capacity to respond to new challenges. The hierarchical organization of life, from atoms to molecules to organelles to cells to tissues to organs to systems to the organism, shows how complexity emerges through levels. Simple components following basic rules combine to create structures with new properties. Molecules self-assemble into organelles. Organelles enable cellular functions impossible for molecules alone. Cells cooperate in tissues, generating capabilities beyond those of isolated cells. Organs integrate multiple tissue types into structures performing complex functions. Systems coordinate multiple organs toward common goals. And the organism emerges as more than the sum of these parts, a unified, self-maintaining, responsive being. Evolution has shaped every aspect of physiology, selecting for mechanisms that enhance survival and reproduction. The fundamental biochemistry we employ is shared with all life, testament to common ancestry. The basic plan of organ systems is shared with other mammals, modified in details to suit different lifestyles. The human body carries evidence of its evolutionary history, structures with ancient origins now serving modified or even new functions. The constraints of evolution are also evident. Systems that work well enough to allow survival, but that might be designed differently if starting from scratch. Understanding physiology means understanding not just how systems work, but why they work that way, seeing current function in light of evolutionary history. As we approach the completion of our journey, consider how all these systems unite in enabling the phenomenon of being alive. Your cardiovascular system circulates blood, delivering oxygen from your lungs and nutrients from your digestive tract to every cell while removing wastes for elimination by your kidneys and lungs. Your nervous system receives sensory information, processes it, generates appropriate responses, and coordinates all these activities. Your endocrine system modulates these processes, adjusting metabolism, growth, stress responses, and reproduction. Your muscles contract, powered by ATP generated through the oxidation of nutrients, producing movements that allow you to interact with the world. Your bones provide structure while serving as dynamic stores of minerals. Your skin protects you while regulating temperature and providing sensory input. Your immune system defends against threats while maintaining tolerance for your own tissues. Each breath you take brings oxygen to alveoli, where it diffuses into blood, binding to hemoglobin in red blood cells pumped through pulmonary circulation, returning to the heart to be distributed throughout the body. This oxygen enables cellular respiration, the controlled burning of glucose and other fuels that generates the ATP powering cellular work. The carbon dioxide produced diffuses into blood, returns to the lungs, and is exhaled, completing the cycle. Meanwhile, nutrients absorbed from your digestive tract are distributed, metabolized, stored, or used immediately as needed, with hormones coordinating these decisions. Water and electrolytes are balanced by your kidneys, which adjust their excretion based on intake and losses elsewhere. Your brain continuously monitors internal and external conditions, making predictions, generating actions, learning from outcomes. Your immune system patrols for threats, ready to mount defenses while usually remaining quiet in the absence of danger. All of this occurs simultaneously, continuously, in intricate coordination. The complexity is staggering. Billions of cells, each containing its own complex machinery, each communicating with neighbors, each responding to local and distant signals, each contributing to functions that emerge at higher levels of organization. Yet from this complexity arises order. Variables are maintained within appropriate ranges. Functions are coordinated. The organism persists as a coherent entity despite the constant flux of materials and energy through it. This persistence in the face of change defines life. You are not the same collection of atoms you were 7 years ago. Most molecules in your body have been replaced, broken down, and rebuilt from new materials. Yet you continue maintaining your identity through the constancy of pattern rather than of substance. Like a whirlpool in a stream that maintains its form while the water molecules constituting it constantly change, you maintain your structure and function through the continuous flow of matter and energy. The wisdom of the body lies in these self-regulating mechanisms refined over billions of years of evolution. You need not consciously direct your heartbeat, regulate your breathing during rest, adjust your blood pressure when you stand, secrete digestive enzymes when you eat, or mount immune responses to infections. These processes occur through mechanisms operating at levels below conscious awareness, guided by information encoded in your genes and shaped by experience. Yet, you are not merely a passive beneficiary of these automatic processes. Your choices influence your physiology. What you eat affects your metabolism, nutrient status, and cardiovascular health. How you move influences your muscle strength, bone density, and metabolic rate. Your rest patterns affect hormone secretion, neural function, and immune capability. Your stress levels influence cardiovascular function, immune responses, and nervous system activity. Understanding physiology empowers you to make choices that support the body's regulatory mechanisms rather than overwhelming them. The study of normal physiology also illuminates dysfunction. Many diseases result from the failure of homeostatic mechanisms or from regulatory systems pushed beyond their capacity to compensate. Diabetes involves impaired glucose regulation. Hypertension reflects dysregulated blood pressure control. Heart failure occurs when the heart cannot maintain adequate cardiac output. Kidney disease impairs fluid and electrolyte balance. Understanding normal function provides the foundation for recognizing, understanding, and addressing these pathological states. Physiology also reveals the remarkable resilience of living systems. Redundancy in critical functions provides backup when primary mechanisms fail. Compensation allows other systems to partially offset the loss of one. Repair mechanisms fix damage. Adaptation adjusts function to match altered capacities. Even when systems are compromised, the body often maintains acceptable function through these compensatory mechanisms, though at a cost. Compensation requires resources and may eventually be exhausted if challenges persist. The integration we have explored occurs not only within the body, but between the body and its environment. You are not a closed system, but an open one, continuously exchanging materials, energy, and information with your surroundings. You breathe air from the environment, taking in oxygen and releasing carbon dioxide. You consume food and water, incorporating materials from the external world into your own substance. You release heat, wastes, and various substances back into the environment. Your sensory systems continuously gather information about external conditions, allowing you to respond appropriately. Your actions affect the environment, which in turn affects you. You are embedded in and inseparable from the larger world. This perspective reveals that the boundary between organism and environment is permeable and, in some sense, somewhat arbitrary. Where does the environment end and you begin? At the skin surface. But skin constantly sheds cells and absorbs substances. In the digestive tract, which is technically outside the body, even though enclosed within it, the trillions of bacteria residing in your intestines are not human cells, yet contribute to your health and function. The oxygen molecules you breathe are part of the atmosphere until they cross into your bloodstream. At what point do they become part of you? These questions have no single clear answer, highlighting the interconnectedness of life with its surroundings. As this exploration draws to its close, return your awareness once more to your immediate experience. The gentle rhythm of your breathing continues, unchanged by your attention or inattention. Your heart beats steadily, adjusting its pace to your body's needs without requiring conscious direction. Blood flows through your vessels, oxygen diffuses across membranes, nutrients fuel cellular work, wastes are removed, all part of the seamless, ongoing process of life. Your nervous system processes sensory information, maintains your sense of awareness, enables the very thoughts you have about these processes. Your muscles maintain your posture, ready to produce movement when desired. Your skin forms the interface between inner and outer, protecting while connecting. All the systems we have explored, all the mechanisms we have examined, continue their quiet work. They have been operating throughout this entire journey of learning, maintaining the homeostasis that allows you to exist, to experience, to understand. The physiology we have studied is not abstract knowledge about distant phenomena, but intimate knowledge about yourself at the most fundamental level. These are the processes that make you possible. The body is an achievement of remarkable sophistication, built through evolution's patient work over inconceivable spans of time, developing in each individual through the precisely orchestrated unfolding of genetic programs, maintained through life by mechanisms of extraordinary complexity, operating with remarkable reliability. To study physiology is to study the solution to the problem of staying alive in a changing world. to observe how matter organizes itself into patterns that resist entropy, at least temporarily, creating pockets of order that persist and even reproduce. There is no urgency in this knowledge, no pressure to master it all immediately. The systems will continue their work whether you understand them or not. But understanding brings its own rewards, a deeper appreciation for the ordinary miracle of existence, a recognition of the profound order underlying what might seem chaotic, a sense of connection to all life through the shared mechanisms that animate us all. The river continues its flow through countless channels. The symphony plays on through movements both obvious and subtle. The city hums with activity in every district, coordinated toward common purpose. These metaphors we have carried through our journey point toward a truth beyond any single image, that you are a process rather than a thing, a verb rather than a noun, a continuous becoming rather than a static being. Rest in this understanding. Your body knows what to do. Evolution has equipped it with tested mechanisms, refined through countless generations. Your genes encode instructions accumulated over billions of years. Your cells carry out processes proven effective by the simple fact of your existence. The homeostatic mechanisms we have explored will continue their work, detecting, responding, adjusting, maintaining the balance that sustains you. Nothing needs to be forced. Nothing needs to be controlled consciously. The wisdom is already present, operating in the background of every moment, as reliable as the turning of the earth. Your next breath will come without effort. Your heart will beat without command. Digestion will proceed, circulation will continue, waste will be eliminated, all part of the ongoing flow that is life. As we complete this circular journey, returning to where we began, carry with you the knowledge that you are held by systems of remarkable sophistication, sustained by mechanisms of beautiful elegance, animated by processes of profound complexity. All of this occurs quietly, continuously, automatically, allowing you to simply exist, to experience, to be. The exploration is complete, yet the processes continue. The knowledge settles into understanding. The details integrate into patterns, and life flows on as it always has, as it always will, sustained by the quiet workings of physiology, the science of how we live.